This video is brought to you by Squarespace. When it comes to God Valley, there were pretty much two things that drove almost everyone to that island. The celestial dragons went for the native cleansing festival, and the pirates went after the stolen treasure from Hachinosu, which then caused Garp to go there as well. And before I get into what that treasure was exactly, the thing that we need to ask first is how the government got a hold of it in the first place. They supposedly took it from the pirate island, which was led by Rox himself and all these other legendary pirates. If it was important enough for Rox to go after it God Valley after it was taken, then surely they had it under lock and key back at the base before it was taken, right? You would imagine that taking their treasure would require an all-out war or something. Pirates just don't give up their treasure that easily. Unless there was an inside man. A traitor, someone who betrayed the Rox crew and simply gave the government that treasure to further their own cause. I mean, we already know that they were a crew with a lot of infighting, and Kaido even talked about how pirates always betray each other. Maybe this is even why Oda's keeping one single Rox pirate silhouetted out of the entire group still. Because if you think about it, the incident at God Valley really only happened because that treasure was there. The pirates never would have gone there without it, and thus the native cleansing festival probably would have gone on without a hitch, and Sengoku wouldn't have had much to tell us. So if somebody did give up that treasure to the government on purpose before God Valley, thus giving Rox and Roger a reason to go there at the very same time, you could almost consider them like the mastermind behind God Valley, because they played a huge part in assembling those powers together. And out of all the Rox pirates, I believe that that individual would have to be none other than Wang Zhi, otherwise known as Ochoku, the only man other than Rox or Blackbeard that we know of to lead Pirate Island, which is pretty interesting because Wang Zhi is based on a real-life Chinese pirate named Wang Zhi, who was essentially a real-life Shichibukai. His government looked the other way to his pirate activities, and he was even called the Pirate King at one point because of how much influence he had. And yes, I know that Wang Zhi should be pronounced Wang Zhi as well, but most people just say Wang Zhi at this point in the community, so I'm just going to stick to that when I'm referring to the One Piece version. But this is what makes Wang Zhi holding Pirate Island so interesting. Could he have somewhat followed in the real Wang Zhi's footsteps and maybe gave the government that treasure so that in return he could run Pirate Island unabated? I mean, whether it's Blackbeard offering up Ace or Law offering up 100 hearts, both of whom were there when Wang Zhi lost Hachinosu by the way, we know that the government's favor can be bargained for. I mean, even today, Teach wants Hachinosu to become a government-recognized island, so maybe in some ways Wang Zhi was already way ahead of him back at God Valley. And if you want to hear more about the real Wang Zhi and how his story might tie to Rocky Port, I highly recommend this video from my guy Randy Troy, which I'll link down below. But now I want to dive into exactly who the One Piece Wang Zhi really is, because this isn't someone that we've gotten a design for, nor actually met yet, but we know that they were a member of the Rox crew and were alive as recently as Rocky Port. And I would say that by process of elimination, there's maybe like a 98 or 99% chance that he's the guy in the bottom left of this panel in chapter 1096. And I think a lot of you watching may already kind of understand why that is, but I'm going to explain it anyway because there have been a lot of theories saying otherwise, and it is a little tricky. But the main thing is that we have 9 faces down here in the bottom of this panel, and aside from Rox himself, we know of 9 big name Rox pirate members. They are Whitebeard, Shiki, Big Mom, Kaido, Miss Buckingham Stussy, Captain John, Gloriosa, which was revealed in this chapter, Silver Axe, and Wang Zhi. I think it's safe to assume at this point that these names are like the main 9 crew members in a very similar way to Luffy having 9 crew members right now. I mean, Sengoku mentioned all of these names except for Miss Buckingham and Gloriosa when first telling us about God Valley, which kind of just shows that they had to be key players in the altercation. So if we try to match up all the names with all the faces here, because we have 9 for both, we're pretty much just left with Silver Axe and Wang Zhi somehow split up between the 2 in the corner. And we can rule out the top guy being Wang Zhi pretty much right away because we saw that guy as a zombie during Thriller Bark. And Wang Zhi was alive at that time. So that also means that the 4-arm guy can't be Wang Zhi either, by the way, because he was also a zombie back then. So by process of elimination, basically, the top face should be Silver Axe, and then the bottom one should be Wang Zhi. Which I gotta admit, it's pretty ironic that Oda names a guy Silver silver axe when he doesn't wear silver nor uses an axe. He wears gold armor and uses a sword, which is pretty on brand for One Piece if you ask me, and I'm a big fan of that. So like I said, it's not technically confirmed that the guy in the corner is Wang Zhi, but I think the logic is pretty sound given the 9 names and the 9 faces. I mean, for that not to be the case, then basically Oda would have had to slip in some random new guy that we don't know of instead of the 9th and final member that wasn't just named but was specifically said to be at God Valley already, which would be kind of weird to say the least in my opinion. And before we dive into who Wang Zhi might be connected to and what his future role is and how he betrayed Rocks and all that stuff, I think it's important to mention one other very essential component in all of this, and that's Guinea. If Wang Zhi did give the government Rocks' treasure, then an almost equally important part in all of this is making sure that other pirates know the treasure's there so they go after it. And it seems that Guinea is the reason that happened. I mean, even Garp seemed to have heard about it before Kong even called him, which surprised Kong quite a bit actually. So obviously Guinea was able to spread that information far and wide. But you have to wonder how many more pirates would have gotten there if she just made a website with the sponsor for today's video, Squarespace. So the website you're looking at right now is my brand new custom theory tracking site that I made using Squarespace's Fluid engine. And I'm not kidding, this version you're looking at right now took me probably less than an hour to make. Their design system prompts you to choose a template, lets you customize pretty much every single detail on either desktop or mobile, and then you just need to make it live so people can go check it out, which my site is live right now, and the link's down below if you're curious. And Squarespace also enables you to sell custom merch and other products on an online store, run email campaigns, schedule appointments, create gated members only areas for those VIPs, and even allow for multiple contributors with varying access levels. And if you head over to squarespace.com right now, you can even get a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, just go to squarespace.com/daxsake to save 10% on your first purchase of a website or domain. So thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring, but let's get back to the video. But I think Guinea leaking God Valley information to the outside world is actually a huge hint into what that treasure actually was. This topic has been theorized on since pretty much the day that chapter dropped, and I think one really important thing to note since then is that many people still refer to it as the crown jewel of Hachinosu, but in the official version they simply use the word treasure, and upon further review, which I am no expert to be fair, it is simply the word takara, which is just the word for treasure. There's no indication of a crown or jewel specifically here, and I know a lot of theories tied to that naming, but unfortunately it appears we're just looking for any kind of treasure basically. And like I said, thanks to Guinea's dialogue, I think we can almost ascertain that the devil fruits the government used as the tournament prizes are the answer here. Those things are what they took from Hachinosu, because in 1096 she said that those prizes were their key to escape, and then described Kaido's and Kuma's, which are still the only 2 we know about by the way, and immediately following that she says, I leaked all of this info to the outside world. So she's basically telling us right there that she leaked information about the fruits specifically, the prizes, because that was going to draw the pirates there. And then when those pirates actually arrived, so many of them, from both crews even, mentioned wanting the treasure. And even Kaido's dialogue with Big Mom saying it would be useless in her hands hints that devil fruits are what they're after, because Big Mom already had her devil fruit at that point, and thus it would be useless to her because she can't eat a second one. I mean, Big Mom even went right for Kaido's fruit and tried to get Kuma's as well when she got there. Plus, given all the ties between Rocks and Blackbeard, it shouldn't be surprising that Rocks was collecting fruits kinda like Blackbeard is right now, right? So I think the devil fruits are just the obvious answer here. And I even think Garp's dialogue with Kong also kind of confirms this, because Kong was surprised that Garp knew the treasure was taken from Hachinosu. Garp had to hear about it from somewhere else first before talking to Kong, and that's probably because he heard Guinea's broadcast just like the other pirates did. But you know, Guinea herself said that she told everyone about the devil fruits, about, you know, the prizes in the chest. So Garp almost answers the question for us, because if he heard about the fruits from Guinea's broadcast, but then mentions the treasure to Kong, then he kinda knows that the fruits are the treasure, right? Now maybe Guinea could have leaked additional info and there's another treasure we don't know about, but all the signs to me are really pointing towards the fruits being the answer. Also, if Kong was surprised that Garp knew about this before he told him, then that also tells us that Garp wasn't involved in whatever event let the government take Hachinosu's treasure, which again may hint that someone on the inside had to give up those fruits. Garp is one of their strongest marines. I mean, we don't know that much about who was around back then, but the fact Kong is calling Garp in this scenario kind of hints that Garp was a big deal even way back then, right? So if he wasn't involved in getting the treasure, well, I think it's probably just that there was a traitor, and Wang Zhi is the safe answer, because not only is he the only silhouetted Rocks member left, which is just kind of suspect in and of itself, but he was also the one who led Pirate Island between Rocks and Blackbeard. Now, we don't know when Wang Zhi took it over, but if he was alive back then at God Valley, and probably lived there before then while being on Rocks' crew, I think it kind of makes logistical sense for him to be the one who got it following God Valley all the way up until Rocky Port, where he lost it to Blackbeard. But either way, why would Wang Zhi get it instead of any of the other Rocks members? Well, maybe he brokered a deal. Maybe he gave up those fruits to almost become a warlord before there were even warlords, to earn the right for the government to look the other way to what he was doing on that island, just as the real Wang Zhi did, and just as many other warlords have done in One Piece already. I mean, like I said at the beginning, Blackbeard traded Ace to become a warlord, Law traded 100 pirate hearts the day that Wang Zhi fell to become a warlord, and Crocodile and Doflamingo were doing terrible things on their island for years but got away with it as long as they all played nice with the government. The government does not mind making deals if it benefits them. So I think Wang Zhi was just ahead of his time in that regard and kind of got the nod to be a warlord before the system was a real thing. And like I said, Blackbeard wants to make Hachinosu a legitimately government recognized island now that he's in charge. But maybe Wang Zhi was kind of already doing that without the title, I guess. Which would make sense if he really did lead Pirate Island for 37 whole years between God Valley and the time skip. But honestly, the thing that really makes Wang Zhi suspect number one for me isn't just the Pirate Island stuff. It's his design. Because even the very first time that I saw this guy during my live reaction, I noticed that he looked a little bit like X Drake. And now obviously that's a little bit of a stretch because, you know, all we have is part of a silhouette here. But even from what we do have, you can see the outline of what look like some kind of sunglasses, which Drake like literally has just the outline of those. It's just like some straps around his eyes or whatever. He also has sideburns somewhat like Drake does, and he seems like his nose is kind of pointy like Drake's is. And it also looks like this dude's wearing a big hat of some kind, and Drake was also wearing a big hat in the pre-time skip, but he got rid of it in the post-time skip for some reason. So again, I know that's a little bit of a stretch, but the reason why I wanted to bring that up is the fact that I noticed they look somewhat similar before I even came up with any of this theory or anything is pretty crazy when you consider the fact that Drake's most important role in the story so far has been being a traitor, specifically on Kaido's crew, which again, Kaido spoke about pirates always betraying each other. So this idea isn't something new. I mean, it feels like we've had a betrayal in almost every single arc, I would say, like Corazon under Doflamingo, Kanjuro and Wano, Stussy and York both during Egghead, and plenty of other examples honestly. And with the Rocks crew having a lot of infighting, the situation was ripe for one of them to make a plan to usurp the throne. And I think that's exactly why Wang Zhi was the one to take over Hachinosu after God Valley. I also mentioned earlier the idea that there really is no incident at God Valley without the treasure being there. These cleansings happen every 3 years, and as far as we can tell, God Valley is the only one that had this kind of fanfare. And that's all because the pirates arrived there chasing that treasure, which, you know, pirates do tend to do. So if Wang Zhi did give up that treasure, he is really the one that orchestrated this whole thing. Guinea was essential as well, of course, but just from like a planning perspective, the person who gave up that treasure could effectively be considered the mastermind of God Valley. And that is where the connections to Rocky Port start getting really interesting, because that incident also had a mastermind, which was Trafalgar Law. And both Rocky Port and God Valley also had a hero, being Kobe and Garp respectively, who we know have such a close connection at this point. Could this mean that Law and Wang Zhi have some connection as well? I mean, Law leveraged the events of Rocky Port to become a warlord. Now, we don't know the details, but that seems to be the case. And I spent a lot of this video arguing that Wang Zhi used God Valley to become something like a warlord, like the real Wang Zhi was, where, you know, he could control Hachinosu without government interference. So quite frankly, I think that Wang Zhi could just be like the Trafalgar Law of the Rocks generation. And this all gets even better if you bought those Drake connections from earlier, because he is a common denominator between both Law and Kobe, who again were essential at Rocky Port. For example, Kobe and Drake are both in Sword, and they kept in touch while Drake spent time on Kaido's crew. While Drake and Law have been tied even back to the time that they were kids. Drake's dad, Diaz Barrels, is the guy who got Law's devil fruit before Corazon stole it, and then the Marines mentioned that there was a small child located near the coast, who Doflamingo assumed to be Law, but that kid actually ended up being ex-Drake. So the fates of these two characters have been ominously tied together since day one, even without meeting each other. But when they met up in Sabaody, Law oddly asked Drake if he had ever killed someone. This hints he knows something about him, and maybe the connection goes even deeper than we understand right now. I mean, I think one of the most widely known theories by this point is that Law is actually in Sword, which is an original yet again from my guy Randy Troy, and I'll link that down below. And if that's true, that could make the Drake, Kobe, and Law connection here even crazier in regards to Wang Zhi. Maybe Wang Zhi was like the first ever Sword member in a way, or maybe just his cooperation led to the Sword member program so that people like Drake could then exist, where they basically become pirates just to help rat out even worse pirates, which is something the real Wang Zhi was known to do. That was a big reason why the government looked the other way to his pirate activities. And then going back to Rocky Port and God Valley, other than the mastermind and hero connections, there may be one more tie between the two to think about, which is that one caused Rocks to lose his island, while one let the guy carrying his will, being Blackbeard, take it back. It's almost like Wang Zhi was just keeping the seat warm for him. And you also have to think about how Oda has closely tied Blackbeard to Kobe and Law recently as well, because it didn't just stop at Rocky Port. Blackbeard kidnapped Kobe after Amazon Lily, and then kicked Law's ass on Winter Island. Oda is tying all of these people together for some major reason, and I think a lot of that just started back before God Valley because of Wang Zhi. I mean, just imagine if one of the fruits in those treasure chests end up being the Apop fruit, which isn't confirmed of course, but it's definitely important enough or valuable enough to be in the company of Kaidos and Kumas, I would imagine, so it's possible. Because if the Apop fruit is one of those 6, then the Wang Zhi, Law, and Drake connections are just kind of insane, because it would mean that Wang Zhi would have helped Law's fruit get out into the world, which somehow ended up with Drake's dad Barrels several years later, which then ended up with Law eating it while on the same island as Drake, and then Law used those fruit powers to help take down Wang Zhi at Hachinosu during Rocky Port. Like damn, that is the kind of 5D galaxy brain world building that I come to expect from Oda, and it would just fit so well, I think. But as for Wang Zhi's potential familial connections to Drake, if there is one, since, you know, they look kind of similar, it is kind of tricky, because obviously he's not Drake's dad, that's Diaz Barrels, and it's also unlikely that Wang Zhi is Drake's grandpa, because Drake is already 33. If we assume that everyone in his family had kids right when they turned 18, which is not common in One Piece by the way, then Barrels would have had to be born at least 13 years before God Valley, which makes all of this kind of a weird timeline. I mean, Wang Zhi would be a minimum of 69 years old then, which is even older than Big Mom, but the facial similarities as well as the traitor lineage factor that Barrels, Drake, and maybe Wang Zhi all have, there has to be something here, I think. This situation kind of reminds me of how similar Mjosgard and Green Bull look, like they definitely have a common ancestor somewhere, even though one isn't a celestial dragon. But on the flip side, Mjosgard and Doflamingo share the same family name, and we know they were both celestial dragons at least at one point, but they don't look alike at all. So maybe Drake and Wang Zhi's relation is kind of similar to this, and it just goes back several generations. Like maybe Wang Zhi's grandma and Drake's grandpa were siblings or something like that. But whatever it is, I think the specific connection is kind of speculation right now, but the point is that I think there is one. Which brings us to the next question. If Wang Zhi is still alive, which we don't know about for sure, but you know, Oda doesn't kill people off very often. If he died, I feel like we would know. What does Oda have planned for him in the future? Well, the first thing is that when he returns, I suspect he's going to end up being an ally of the Straw Hats, if for no other reason, because the dude probably hates Blackbeard after he took Hachinosu from him. He might be Team Luffy at this point, and to a degree he may always have been, since, you know, he betrayed Rocks, or at least that's my theory here, and I think it would be kinda cool to get a legit Rocks pirate to be on our side eventually. Now, not as an actual crew member, of course, but you know, one of those people who kinda hitch a ride for a while and provide some important information for us. Because if you think about it, very few people know about God Valley. That's kinda why Sengoku was telling those Marines anyway, and our crew probably has to hear about it eventually, I think. So Wang Zhi would be a really good source for that. I mean, now that he doesn't have a base, he's probably sailing around, so he could show up pretty much whenever. And Wang Zhi would probably know the events better than anyone, since he was there before, during, and even after at Hachinosu. And secondarily, this would also provide a good opportunity for us to see how Luffy compares to Rocks, because we get a lot of examples of how Luffy's similar to Roger, like their dreams and sense of freedom and whatnot, but there are probably some shades of Rocks in Luffy as well. I mean, remember, Rocks fought against the Celestial Dragons at God Valley, while Roger fought to protect them. On paper, at least, Rocks is probably acting how Luffy would act. I mean, Luffy punched a celestial dragon already, so Wang Zhi could kind of be the guy who fills in those blanks for us, and even gives us kind of a clear flashback on what Rocks was like since he knew the guy so well. And I think the other thing that Wang Zhi could do for us is to tell us about the man marked by flames. Now, I'm not saying that he is the man marked by flames, or that he even knows who exactly it is, but rather he could be the guy who will just tell Luffy the same thing that Kid, Law, and Blackbeard seem to know, which is that, like, this guy holds the last poneglyph, he has a black ship, he creates whirlpools, etc, etc, etc. It appeared that Luffy and the crew didn't hear about it while everyone else did, so someone's gotta fill us in. And again, I think Wang Zhi may want to do this because he probably hates Blackbeard now after he took Hachinosu. And I mean, if Wang Zhi did betray Rocks, it would also line up that he hates Blackbeard anyway since Teach is carrying Rocks' will. So helping Luffy may just be the best way to go about getting some kind of revenge. And if Wang Zhi did give some information on the man marked by flames to Luffy, it would kind of make him and Law like the equalizers in a way between Luffy and Blackbeard. Because as of the end of Wano, Luffy had 3 road poneglyph rubbings, but was unaware of the man marked by flames, while we know that Blackbeard knew about the man marked by flames, but was missing several road poneglyphs, which he said he hoped to get from Law. Now, we know he beat Law, but we never saw him get those rubbings, so whether he has them is up in the air right now, but the point that I'm making is that Law and Wang Zhi could kind of be equalizers to get Luffy and Teach at the same point, where they would both have 3 rubbings and are aware of the man marked by flames, and both simply need to find him to then go get the One Piece. I actually have quite a bit more in the tank when it comes to Wang Zhi theories, but this video is already getting kind of long, so if you want to see more, definitely make sure to give me a big like down below and subscribe. And in the meantime, if you maybe want to hear more about what Blackbeard's doing in the final saga and how he might get the remaining poneglyph rubbings, definitely check out this recent video that I did on Shanks vs Blackbeard. But until next time, later.